so David and I, so I've known him since I was in 3rd grade. So David actually was my pastor when I was in like 3rd through 6th grade, and then we both went off and had 25 years of other life. And then when I moved back to Maryland 5 years ago and was appointed to Damascus, David was the senior pastor there. And so we worked together for 4 years. So I've asked David to join us today because we may need to have more conversations in the future, and I have a lot of bias and opinions, and it's easier when someone leads us from a neutral place, and David's very good at that. So in times where I feel like it'd be better to have someone else's voice lead, I've invited him to do that. So basically, I'm going to get us started. He's going to pray for us, and then I'm going to get us started today with some stuff, and then he's going to step in. All right? So thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to share the information you hear today with folks. So does everybody should have, we're just going to start with a copy of the slides that looks like this. All right, that's so that you can take notes if you wish, or whatever. And then you should also have a handout that the front page says United Methodist Words and Concepts, and looks like this. Everybody has both? Lovely. All right. Will you pray for us, David? And feel free to introduce yourself in any way. I introduced you relative to me, but...
Introduce myself in any way. Well, I was born in... we don't need power. That would help if I turned it on with two different ways.
Yep, here you go.
All right. Any better? Any better?
Yeah.
A little bit, okay. It's a great pleasure to be with you all today to help sharing this. This is an important conversation. I'm going to try to make sure you hear everything that you need to hear, get to ask what you need to ask, and no more than that. So we're not going to pile on other stuff that you don't want to hear about or don't need to know necessarily about at this point. So we'll try to keep that in mind for you. But let's start with prayer and ask God's presence with us. Gracious, wonderful God, we do come before you and seek now your Spirit upon us as we talk through all the questions that are facing our denomination now in very short order. We speak of denomination, O Lord, but your interest is always in your kingdom. And let that be our interest as well, that whatever form that we take, that we can serve you for your glory and for your purpose, and proclaim the good news of the gospel as a saving power for this world. Now guide us in our reflections, lead us in our conversation, be present with us in all ways, as we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so my half of the conversation is just to do some basic Methodist vocabulary and Methodist structure review. I grew up Methodist my whole life and still didn't know how the Methodist Church was structured until I got to seminary and learned a lot more. So I'm just going to come that way when David talks about General Conference, the Council of Bishops, the Book of Discipline. We'll know what those are, and so we'll have some So I'm not going to read, I'm assuming that everybody can read just fine on their own. So the list of terms are very detailed and are some of the important ones. I'm going to hit some of them more briefly in the presentation, but I wanted you to have something written down in case you couldn't remember or something like that. So just, those are there for you, but I'm going to be working from the slides, okay? So first, before I get into that, let me just, and I know some of the print on the slide is small, that's why I printed it, so you could have it in your hands as well. Just setting some expectations and goals for today so we can be really clear what we're trying to do. So today's goals are to gain an understanding of the structure of the United Methodist Church and how it makes decisions, make sure everybody understands how that happens. And then to comprehend the challenges of the developing conversation around sexuality. What are the challenges, how have we handled it so far, how are we looking at some things in the next couple of weeks, and then how might that play out for us in the future, which David and I are not prophets with crystal balls. All right, so we're guessing from places of educated wisdom, but we don't know, because some of these things have not happened yet. Also to gain an understanding of the plans being proposed, possible outcomes as they relate specifically to our local congregation. Just a quick note, all right, what today isn't. We're not making any decisions today. There will be no voting, all right, no taking of sides. It's not a debate about sexuality. We're not going to be asking people's opinions, and it's just not, this is not a time where I'm inviting people necessarily to express personal opinions about how they feel about sexuality. We want people to understand what's being proposed, and we want you to ask questions of clarification, But we're like, David and I are not going to be arguing for or against a particular way. We're sharing these are the ways that the Methodist Church, and you're invited to ask questions of clarification, but try to just avoid, if you can, taking us to a place where we end up in debaters, because that's just not what we're trying. If we were trying to do that, we'd probably set it up in a slightly different format. And then so even though Dave and I are presenting more than everybody sort of having a chance to speak, this is a precedent I'd just like to start with. Anytime we're gathering together as a congregation, I'd like it to be our covenant with each other that we engage in what I'm calling holy conversation. Everyone should have their opinions and their thoughts, and I want you to be passionate, but I don't want anybody to be harmed. And words can hurt, so it was funny, I was just having a discussion in Bible study a couple weeks ago where someone was saying sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And I said that when I was about 15, I changed that to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words shatter my soul. Because words hurt me a lot, especially, and then I don't respond well to some words. I get very defensive and things like that. So the purpose of holy conversation is because I want us to acknowledge first that we're in a room where the people in this room matter to us. And so we try to just approach conversation that way. So I chose a scripture for us maybe to guide our mindset. So this is out of Paul's letter to the Galatians. And it reads, the fruit of the Spirit. So the way we can tell the Holy Spirit is present is if any of these things are developing. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So as I read through that list, I know some of those that come to me easily, and some of those I have to really sometimes take note of, like patience. So I just invite you, before you speak, just ask yourself, is what I'm about to say patient? Is it under the realm? Is it good? Is it faithful? Things like that, just so that it is, not just in this conversation today, but really in future conversations if we need to have them. There's a sense that we love each other more than the conversation. All right, so a little, wow, that is really harder to see than I thought. I apologize. So a little Methodism 101. There's this little pie chart here. And the piece that's sort of set apart says General Conference. And the one just to its left is the Council of Bishops. And the one at the bottom says Judicial Council. In sort of loose terms, you can think of the United Methodist system as slightly similar to American government. There are three branches, sort of an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a legislative branch. So the Council of Bishops is our executive branch. All right, so we don't have a single person like a pope or a president that is sort of a great power, but we do rise elders to the level of what's called bishops. So David and I are both ordained elders in the United Methodist Church. So we've been ordained, and as an elder, it means we feel a call to preach and a call to serve sacraments, baptism. There are persons who are ordained as deacons, and they're also ordained their ministries to more, so you might see them specialize like in prison ministry, music ministry, children's education. They may work in churches around the world, but their call is not necessarily to preach or do sacraments. So elders then can be elected, so that's how bishops get determined. They're nominated by annual conferences, which we'll get to in a minute, and then they are elected. So all of our persons are elected officials, just like you see in American government. None of them are like, we don't necessarily like pray and they just appear from God or anything like that. I'm not making fun of that, I'm just saying that's not our process. So the Council of Bishops is made up of both retired bishops and current bishops that are active. And so the entire world is broken up into conferences. All right, so the structure of that, hang on, maybe get rid of myself. Hang on, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll do more of that in a second. Sorry, I'll come back to that in a second. So the Council of Bishops is sort of that executive branch. They don't have the same powers as the president, okay? So they can't overrule general but we think of them as, the idea is they're meant to be leaders that guide us from a spiritual place. And they do, in their own areas, make what's called rulings of law. So it's also their job to interpret the book of discipline and decide how it needs to be implemented, if a person's violating it, things like that. This is very surface. By the way, if you want a very thorough discussion of this, just let me know. I'll do a whole Bible study on Methodist 101 and we can really get into it. The Judicial Council is kind of our Supreme Court. It's structured very similarly. It's made up of, is it 9 people? I think it's 9 persons, lay people and clergy they're also elected to those positions. They serve a certain period of time and they rotate off the Judicial Council. So you're not on it till you die like our Supreme Court, but or retire. So you just serve a certain number of terms. Also elected, and so the Judicial Council reviews the decisions that bishops make. So after all the decisions that a bishop makes are submitted to Judicial Council, which meets a couple of times a year, and they go through and say the bishop was right, or we feel like the bishop misinterpreted the law here, so they hold the bishops accountable. And then they also review the things that come up at General Conference and say, yes, this is within our Constitution, no, this is non-constitutional, so you need to change this or that. And so then the General Conference is a lot like our legislative branch. It's just one body, so it's not, we don't have senators or congressmen, but we have delegates that are lay people and clergy, so if you want to think of it that way. Equal numbers, there's 1,000 persons that show up at a General Conference from all around the world, and it's 500 clergy and 500 lay people, so there's a balance between, when I say lay people, by the way, those are non-ordained persons who are members of the United Methodist Church, so I consider all of y'all lay people. And so at General Conference, so typically we have a General Conference every 4 years, and it usually falls in election year, so it's easy for us to keep up with as an American. And so we had one in 2016. So the one that's happening at the end of this month is a special General Conference. We do have the ability to call special General Conferences, and that's what we've done with this one. There will be then another in 2020. So there will be the regular 4-year cycle. And the way that delegates selected, they are also elected. So from each annual conference, which I promise I'll explain in a moment, or central conference, lay delegates and clergy delegates are elected by their own. So lay people elect lay people, clergy elect the clergy they want to send. So they get to decide the voices, and they send those delegates. And the number of delegates you send varies on how many United Methodists are in your area. The more United Methodists you have, the more delegates you get to send. So for example, we are in the Baltimore, Washington annual conference, and we send 6 of each. Yes, yeah. So we send 6 lay persons, and 6 clergy to General. I came out of a different conference that was called the Rocky Mountain Conference. It's much, much bigger geographically. It includes nearly 3 entire states of the West, Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming, but has far fewer United Methodists. They only send 3 of each. 3 lay persons and 3 clergy to General Conference. So depending on how many United Methodists you have actively in your area, you get to send a larger delegation. Does that sort of make sense to everybody as I've broken it down? Okay. All right, so this gives you, I'm so sorry. On my computer, that looks so good and so easy to read. The circles here are trying to show you the bands of growth. So that little bottom circle is the local church. I'm happy to email these slides to anybody that wants a copy, by the way. So we have the local church is that inner band. All right, so that's us, Mayo United Methodist Church. All right, so there we are, Mayo United Methodist Church. All right, and then local churches are grouped together in the United States in what's called annual conferences. All right, so it's a geographical region. It might relate to your state, it might not. So, for example, Baltimore, Washington Conference is southern and the western half of Maryland. So take the eastern shore out. All right, so kind of the bay divided us, except southern Maryland's all included. All the way out to the west, there's a little piece. We have 6 churches in West Virginia and all of Washington, D.C. So I don't begin to know how you draw that line, okay? But that's our conference, right? Whereas, like I said before, I came from the Rocky Mountain Conference, which is now combined with another conference that would be Mountain Sky, and they are all of Colorado, all of Utah, all of Wyoming, all of Montana, and a piece of Idaho. So just be glad you don't live out there. All right, so we are the Baltimore, Washington annual conference, and then in the United States, we are then gathered into 5 jurisdictions. All right, so the United States is broken up into West, and then you have North and South in the East, and North and South in the middle. All right, so we are in the Northeast jurisdiction. Every 4 years following General Conference, there's also a jurisdictional conference, all right? It is one of the biggest things that happens is that is where bishops are elected, all right? You only elect bishops if there's an opening, and you elect bishops for your jurisdiction, all right? So the Northeast gathers together and says, okay, we've nominated all these persons, we need 2 new bishops, and they do this rounds of voting, and then the person who gets voted becomes the newest bishop. And then, so we don't elect bishops for the West, all right? And the West doesn't elect bishops for the Southeast, all right? And the idea is that the persons, clergy and lay people in that area have a sense of what type of leadership they might need. Outside of the United States, there are not annual conferences in jurisdictions. There are central conferences that are sort of a blurring of the two together. Okay, so if you can find all of this on the United Methodist website, pretty pictures and everything. So if you pull it up, you'll see, like they have pretty maps and everything. So if you pull up Africa, it'll show you how the central conferences are broken up in Africa, and then there are annual conferences within that. So instead of having jurisdictions, they have central conferences. Okay, everybody good so far? All right, and then all of so everybody and we send delegates to the jurisdiction. We send more delegates to the jurisdictional conference than we do to general conference, but all the ones that go to general conference also go to the jurisdictional conference. How was that for being clear as well? Okay, and then we have the general conference, which, as I said, meets once every 4 years. Okay, so that's kind of how we grow through it. And then, so at general conference, one of their main responsibilities is to keep track of what's called the Book of Discipline. All right, so we produce a new copy of this every 4 years. It's been in existence for over 200 years, or close to.
Since the beginning.
Yep. So John Wesley kind of had and they put together a constitution at that first conference that they called together, and we've been working from that. It's expanded. You used to be able to fit it in your pocket of your saddlebag, but I don't really want to do that much anymore. So there's a lot of pieces in the Book of Discipline, and it can be pretty complex, so I've just selected 3 things you need to know about the Book of Discipline, all right? So if you just remember these 3 things for today. 1, it's a book of legislation that governs how the United Methodist Church operates. All right, so it's a book but what's in it can be changed. All right, so we did not consider, I guess this might be a matter of personal opinion, but it's not set up so that it has to stay that way forever. But changing it is intentionally not easy, just like changing the United States Constitution. We can make amendments to it, but it's not simple because we didn't want so much change that, there's that kind of thing. So it can only be modified, though, by the General Conference. So those worldwide delegates that gather every 4 years. So say I'm just gonna make this is stupid. It would never happen, but say instead of the book cover being this color, they wanted to say, we're gonna make the book cover blue. That's not even something to say, but I'm just trying to, General Conference votes, and if the majority, in that case, let's say a majority vote's required, majority vote says yes, it should be a blue cover. And then what happens is the decisions made at General Conference go to the Judicial Council. And the Judicial Council reads through it and says, a blue cover in no way violates our Constitution. We don't see anything you need to change or edit. You get the thumbs up from us, and then it gets implemented at the annual conference, jurisdiction, central conference level. All right, so then we all get a memo that says, this year's you're printing your books of discipline, they need to have blue covers. And if I say I want a blue cover, I'm gonna have a white cover. And I got caught with a white cover of my book of discipline, and David felt like that really wasn't right. Then David has the ability to report me for having a white cover, and then there's a whole process from there. So within it, there are our bylaws, theology, what we believe. There's called the Articles of Religion, so what we say we believe about God, Jesus Christ, and everything like that. A constitution, and then so much more about how we structure committees and everything else that it's almost painful to read some of the sections. But Dave and I are kind of geeky, I mean that in a positive way, and we love the Book of Discipline. So that is, oops. So that's kind of the intro to the sections of the United Methodist Church. Yes?
Book of Discipline. So when they meet at their annual conference and they have...
This isn't a people hear your questions, that we won't repeat questions as such.
So anything that's approved at this, like the Book of Discipline gets a white cover, that Book of Discipline gets updated with that new bylaw?
Yes. So once it's been gone through the judicial council, then a new, so there's usually a lag. And so the general conference usually happens in the spring, and usually by that fall we have new. Yes, that's why if you noticed, if I went back, you'll notice that the book of discipline, that one says 2016. I also had my office 2012, 2008, and that kind of thing. Good question. Anybody else have questions just sort of about the basics? So that David talks about, so he's not going to review this. If he just says general conference, annual conference, bishops, delegates, you'll feel like you have a sense of what he's saying. Beauty. So David's going to do more of this, but we have a video. So Tom Berlin is a clergy in the North Virginia Conference, and he was on what's called the Commission of the Way Forward, which David will explain more in a little bit. He put together a really great video, in my personal opinion, that sort of outlines the conversation, where people are, and why has this been such a problem for the United Methodists? Why have we been? Because we've been having discussions, fights, debates over sexuality for 50 years, and has never been able to resolve it until that's what we're trying to do now. And so we're going to watch this 20-minute video that will just sort of give you some insight into that conversation. All right?
I hope you found that helpful. Tom's done a lot of these. He's gone different places to speak and put out different videos. I found him to be one of the most helpful out of this whole conversation because it's very clear and he can lay things out in a very systematic way. So get a sense from him of what we're working on. So I'm going to talk to you about the discipline. The discipline has been part of our denomination from the very beginning. It has several sections to it. One of it does include our articles of faith. So you must say, well, what do United Methodists believe? That's what we'd find those in the articles of faith. And it reads like doctrinal statements that go on. Very, very, very similar to the Church of England, actually, because Wesley put them together, and Wesley was an Anglican priest. So he scratched out the few that he wasn't big on, and the rest of them read pretty much the same, and that's been our doctrinal tradition from the very beginning. No one, including General Conference, changes that. Discipline also includes our Constitution, and that is just like the country's Constitution. It's fairly broad, but it lays out how we're structured, who has what powers, and this kind of thing. That can be changed, but not only by General Conference. If there's a constitutional amendment, that goes back to annual conferences, and each annual conference has got to approve that by a 2/3 majority vote to approve it, and X amount of annual conference has to do that. So it's a big deal to change the Constitution. It's like if we have an amendment to country, then it goes to the states and how that, that works. It's that kind of thing. The other pieces are the legislative pieces that we work with and include everything that's related to the church. If you're on the Board of Trustees, you have a whole section of discipline about property. If you want to borrow money, if you want to remodel, if you want to sell the property, if you want to put a lien on the property, any of that, there are rules of what you have to do and what processes you have to go through. Who can be on the administrative board? What powers does this group have or that group have? How does the superintendent come into that? Everything that you want to be there. You want to become an ordained pastor, whole chapters on what you go through to do that, which committees interview whom. It goes on and on. It's wonderful bedtime reading. You would thoroughly enjoy it. It's this part of the discipline, which is really the major part, that legislative piece, that's discussed every 4 years. And so it can be changed by the General Conference. And only General Conference speaks for the denomination. Bishops do not. Annual Conference does not. Clergy not. Only the General Conference. And only the General Conference can change those sections of the discipline. And they look at it all every 4 years. Because guess what? Every 4 years, every single United Methodist is allowed to send a petition. You start counting millions of United Methodists. Every local church can send a petition. Every district conference can send a petition. Every annual conference can send a petition. And every jurisdictional conference can send a petition. If you are a general conference delegate, then about a year ahead, as soon as you're elected, you get a stack of papers to start to work through. For that, and then there are legislative sections, and they work through it. So that's the part that we're always working with. And for the most part, that goes pretty cleanly and smoothly. There are not a lot of changes that kind of move. They'll change structure a little bit, and, or some wording to be a little clearer, and everybody's, that's good. But there are some sections that we have been discussing intensely. I was going to say fighting, but I'm going to avoid that. We have been discussing intently for about 40 years now. So I just retired after 41 years of ministry. This has been part of the discussion my entire career. Which I have to tell you, it's heartbreaking in many ways. It's like, really? It takes us 4 decades. However we come out on this, it takes us 4 decades to do it. So my entire career, that's been on. And it relates to different passages of the discipline. You have those written out for us in one of the sheets, so I'm not going to read that for you. Maybe the second page. Particular passages which have not been part of the discipline from the beginning. They actually came in at the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. And the precipitating incident for that was when the Methodist Church merged with the Evangelical United Brethren Church, and we became the United Methodist Church. And that's in 1968 when that merger takes place. And so some of the articles of faith get worked in together between these two denominations, and some of the structure starts to get worked out so that that molds together. And out of that, passages start to come into the discipline that were not there before. So when I say we've been at this for 40-some years, really from 68 to now is when that's been going. And it relates, these are the passages on human sexuality. And the key ones are no gay marriage, clergy cannot participate and or conduct gay marriage. Gay marriage cannot take place in a local church, one of our local churches. And if you are gay, you can be a member of the church, you can participate in the church, you can be active in the church, but you cannot be ordained to serve.
If you're gay and practicing.
Well, they say they use the word self-avowed practicing homosexuality. They don't define that exactly, but that's the language that goes with it. So you can read that. And then our agencies that have funding responsibilities are not allowed to fund ministries or programs that are going to support that in any way. So they're the passages. There are only a handful of them. And there's a yin and a yang that goes with them as well, because it will say all persons are sacred in the sight of God, all persons are part of the faith, all persons will be part of the church, then the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And so it goes back and forth on that, and the church has never really agreed with itself on where this should be and how it should go. So every general conference, this is a major topic. It has intensified in the more recent years, some of because of what Tom was sharing in the video. So Amanda just explained that delegation to general conference is dependent on number of Methodists. Right? So with a higher concentration of Methodists, you get more delegates. In the United States, where the two topics primarily are marriage and ordination, membership has been declining in our denomination. Where has it been the fastest growing? Rapidly growing.
You said it, I heard someone.
Africa and Asia. And so membership, the delegation has been shifting. And as Tom said, in Africa, they're not talking about marriage and ordination. That would be, why would that even be a topic? They're talking about homosexuality at all, as even existing. In many African nations, it's not just a criminal offense, as Tom said, it's a capital offense. In 5 African nations, if you aid a homosexual person in any way, it's a 10-year prison term. I just want you to hear the intensity of that within the society. And so when it comes to church and saying, well, we might marry, or we might ordain, or you can be part of the church, it's like, what? That's just totally out of the parameters. And so that has intensified that conversation tremendously, because the number of delegates has gone up, over the years with it. So it's brought it to a head. In General Conference 2016, it was about to explode. And we were on the brink of schism. And so the conference said to our Council of Bishops, you have to lead us through this. You've got to help us find a way to work through this, to come to some resolution to this, so it's not our 40-year discussion, and that we know where we're going to be. So the bishops said, okay, and they put together a commission on the way forward, and said, study this, talk about this, and the commission includes, this is on one of the slides, 32 people from all different nations, and it's a very diverse slate for that. And they've been spending these last couple of years now working on what that might be. So the request came from General Conference to the Council of Bishops. The Council of Bishops puts together this commission. The commission's been working. Now they're bringing 3 proposals back to General Conference. But because it's such a topic, they're saying we're not waiting until 2020 when we've got 10,000 other things to also talk about. We're going to have a special session that will be just this topic. And that's what we're going to do, and that actually is coming up in a couple of weeks. It's going to be happening. So are you all with me so far? That's where it's come from, and what we're working on. And our delegates are all over the map. Our churches are all over the map. Yes, sir?
One question. These, the Book of Discipline, which is, marriage, human sexuality, everything dealing with these topics that are on the 2 pages. When were they last updated? I mean, does this go back 20 years? Does this go back 30 years? Do you have any idea when they were last?
The initial ones went in after the 1968 merger, and then they were updated again in the 1980s, and where they brought some more clarifying language.
But some of the lines have been updated as recently as the most recent General Conference.
Okay, so it's...
Because you can change a single word or sentence, you don't have to change the whole pair.
Okay.
So sentences have been changed at every General Conference.
So a lot of this sounds like it came back in the 80s with the, and then last 40 years. Tweaks.
Yes,
Tweaks.
yes. This doesn't go back to the 1700s and 1800s.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't the
No,
last.
okay.
This is our lifetimes.
I'm sorry, let me ask Steve. I'm trying to remember.
This is one of the reasons we have data here. Is my memory correct that it was in the 90s that it became chargeable offenses? It wasn't always listed in the chargeable offenses, was my understanding. It was added in the early 90s.
I think the specific piece to that, but always in the chargeable offenses is
Right,
enforcing the
but the
discipline.
but the actual language that got added to the charge was in the early
In the
90s.
90s. Talk about a chargeable offense.
Related to this topic.
Yeah.
Right.
This is going to relate to clergy. If you're going to remove, if you're going to take someone's ordination credentials, It has to be because of a charge, we call it chargeable offense. You've got to do something that where you can be tried for it. And those are listed in the discipline. And so performing the wedding in office becomes that.
They have them.
Then you end up with a church trial, and those are big deals.
Yeah, sorry. So just this is the last paragraph of the paragraphs I gave you. And what I'm referring to is the very beginning of section B there. I'm sorry, so it was, yeah, so letter B was added in the 90s. So as David was saying, letter D, disobedience to the order and discipline of the United Methodist Church is always been to basically violate the book of discipline. I can remove on charges. But the more specific language about practices incompatible with Christian teachings, including but not limited to being a self-avowed practice of homosexual or conducting ceremonies which celebrate homosexual unions, performing same-sex wedding ceremonies, that was added in the early 90s. To answer your
Yes, that's it.
I'm going to say just a word then about the 3 plans that have been proposed. But let me just add to that. These 3 plans are with the commission for the way forward have brought forward. So these will be our 3 discussion points. They can be amended, changed in some way. Another whole plan could be, could come from the floor and be offered. I forget now how many different petitions. It's over 100.
I thought there were 87 different plans.
Yeah. It's been climbing by the day. That are variations. So they may do nothing, just say, we're leaving it the way it is, and that's just the way it's going to be. They can take one of these 3 plans, or one of these 3 plans modified, or a plan that's not here. So what's going to come out of this meeting in a couple of weeks, we don't know. Nobody knows. There are lots of prognostications of where that's going to go and who thinks what's going to happen. Gambling is against the social principles in the discipline, so we don't have a line on this in Vegas. You can't put money down on anything that's going to come. We just don't do that. And that topic's not up for this general conference. So we'll see where that's going to go. But you'll get a sense from the 3 plans.
And you have a handout.
And there is a handout that.
This is the trick.
So one is the traditionalist plan. And this is essentially what we have now. So keeping the language that we have, offering what we have. Now the petitions that go with that actually make it a little stricter than it is. So right now, if one of our clergy conducts a same-sex wedding and someone brings a charge, the bishop has lots of leeway in how that's going to be handled. And it may not lead to a church trial. In this plan intensified, it would be required. And it would be automatic, 6-month suspension, and then if you do it again, you lose your credentials. No leeway, no questions asked. So in all of those things, it tightens that up a little bit. And if that plan goes through, all the bishops and all the clergy will have to attest that uphold the discipline, and things will carry on as they're laid out right now, and clergy or bishops or local churches that say, we can't live with that, say, well, we understand that, and we just love you so much, you're welcome to leave. And you can form an autonomous church, but you can't use the name Methodist, and you can carry on the same way and all that, but you're just going to be like a sister denomination. You're not going to belong to the church anymore. So it's laid out in that particular way.
Are you saying that there might be like
split and like a new denomination that is more liberal in nature, that might still be organized?
Yes.
Could everybody hear her question?
He's asking if that could be a split, a new denomination that would be separately organized. That's just what it would be. They would be. I'll give you a great example. We've had this. This is my way on our first rodeo with splits and issues. So one of the splits was around race. It wasn't just the North and South Church that split over slavery. That's a different one. This particular split came when Richard Allen and some others walked out of St. George's Church in Philadelphia because that integrated church had just finished remodeling, and part of the remodeling included putting a balcony into the church. And when the balcony was completed, all the African Americans were told, and that's where you're going to sit. And some said, we don't think so. And so they left, and they formed another denomination. Do you know what that's called?
AME?
Yeah, the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Almost the identical discipline. Articles of faith, organization, the whole 9 yards. But it was a different denomination. And that one was around race. Okay, so that would be the kind of thing that might come out of that. And we might see that either way, by the way, so from either end of this. So that's the traditionalist plan. Another is called the Connectional Conference Plan. And this plan is a boondoggle. I don't know how else to say this. This plan really, it's a way to say we're going to split, but kind of stay together. And so 3 different conferences will be set up, and they will have different orientations, and then jurisdictional conferences, annual conferences, and local churches will be joining those particular conferences in particular. They will hold some of the discipline together in the same. They will hold some of the general agencies together in the same way. So the Board of Pensions and UMCOR and some of these would all relate to all of these. But then they would also have parts of the discipline that were just theirs. And so a conference here would not be geographical. Our conferences now are geographical. They would be by affinity. You're going to join, so your bishop might be in Ohio, and you might be connected to churches that are in 15 different states for that. This requires multiple constitutional changes, so it would take years to implement as it worked through, and it's almost impossible to imagine how that would ultimately be able to work out. But that is one of the plans that's put forth. And then the third plan is called the One Church Plan. The One Church Plan, again, is going to be very similar to the way we are now, but it removes the language of the discipline that we just talked about, and essentially says that local churches and conferences can choose how they want to operate. So if a local church says, we do not want same-sex marriages in our church, then they would not be conducted in that local church. If the clergy person appointed to that church said, I'm not willing to conduct a same-sex marriage, would not be required to. Another pastor could come in to do that perhaps, but would not have to. A conference, an annual conference, would not be required to ordain, but they would also not be prohibited from ordaining. And if the conference says, well, we want to ordain, and the bishop says, I'm not willing to do that, they would bring another bishop in to do that. If a church says, we're not willing to have a person appointed to the church, and the bishop would work with the church on that. So in other words, each church at each level makes its own decisions about where that would be. Now, what I want to say about that is that sounds in some ways unworkable, but the reality is that's how it's working now. So, are you familiar with the words de jure and de facto? One's by law and one's by practice. De jure by law and de facto by practice. By law, we have the traditionalist plan. Right? Discipline says that's not going to happen. But by fact, there are many clergy that are conducting marriages now. There are clergy who are gay or ordained. Our Western jurisdiction elected and consecrated a gay bishop, which the Judicial Council deserved. But they said, you can't do that, but we can't stop you. It's really ultimately what they said.
So we're kind of down. That's where we are right now. The one church.
In de facto, so how is it actually operating? So some churches are saying, no way, no time, in any fashion, and some are saying, hey, it works for us, and so we're seeing that's taking place now. So really what the traditional, one church plan is trying to say is, there are different contexts, there are different opinions on this. Let's take the restrictive language out and free up churches to do what they want to do, and not force anybody one way or the other to do that. And so that's where that plan is. So it's those options that are out there. That's just a summary. You have a sheet that tells you what the implications are for each level. And by the way, the implications go beyond the local church and even our conferences. We have United Methodist seminaries. All of this impacts that. We have general boards and agencies, and that impacts all of those things. So there's a massive structure across the world that raises when you start talking about the denomination. And then you've got the whole question of property. Right? So, except for those who are meeting in schools or whatever, every local church has property. Every annual conference has property. And with who does the property go? If this group leaves, or that group leaves, or this group splits, these are all questions that when you look at plans and how they come out, all of that comes into play. It's not simple. It's not an easy thing. So we've taken our representatives and we put them at Camp David for a little while to try to figure out when we miss another issue. We see this in lots of ways, don't we? In our country, in our church, and all these kinds of struggles. And we're seeing it in our denomination now. It's part of this figuring out what are the implications for this. Who are we? What do we believe? What do we want to represent? What do we want to stand for? What are the implications for this? And we're not united on it. I often say to groups when I'm in conversations with folks, we've not been united in it, and we're not going to be united of one mindset. It's just part of being together as a larger body. Tom made a good point. We're talking about people here. Sometimes this is an issue or this is a question. We're talking about people here. I don't know anyone who doesn't have a neighbor or a friend or a family member, someone in their sphere who's not gay. This is part of our society, it's part of our life. And people feel differently about that. But those connections are real. It's not us, them. it's just us. And what does that mean? And the language, and how we talk about that and how we deal with that is very real and very personal. Because when you start to put names and faces and reality to that, it stops being an issue, it starts being a people concern. And so we're trying to work through, this is really what we're trying to work through with this. I don't know where that's going to go. What does it mean for you? Well, it depends on what plan they come up with and where that's going to go. And again, there's that nice sheet that you have that lays out the, that's sitting here. I got it. This one looks like this. This sheet says what the plan is, and then what does that mean for, for each group or for each level. Depending on what gets chosen and legislated by general conference, and that starts working its way down and ultimately to the local church. And you and Natalie will be having conversations among yourselves and doing some talking, some praying, some studying, some thinking, some sharing about where you want to be as a congregation and how you want to live out your life in that particular way. Most, unless it's the connectional, plan, which is just hard to imagine, that just has so many implications. The other doesn't require a lot from the local church. It's going to kind of state where that, where that's going to be. Let me stop there and see if you have questions.
And if you do, I'm going to bring the microphone just so people can hear your questions. So just know that. Y'all still awake? You're doing all right?
So if you were,
Sorry, hang on.
It appears that any of the plans that you use, you would have to change the Book of Discipline. And that would involve the annual conference.
No, the general, well,
General conference.
the traditionalist plan, if they want to make it stricter, would change, you'd have to add stricter language to it. The traditional plan, the one church plan, you'd have to remove the restrictive language that's in there now, so that would be those changes. If it's the connectional conference plan, that's actual constitutional changes in structure. And so yeah, that's the one that would go back to annual conference to vote on constitutional changes.
So, I'm not a betting woman, but I'm guessing that the one church plan is where a lot of people think we're headed. So, I mean, that looks like, and so would then it come down to the church level about what people would want to do?
So the one church plan is supported by the vast majority of bishops, so we do know that. I think it's 80% was the last I heard support that plan. And if you think
Sorry,
of,
just including our own bishop in case that matters to you.
if you think about the video, with Tom, when he had the four things, and he said the majority were in the center. Those two center groups really lean toward the one church plan.
that was a very helpful visual, by the way.
Yeah, I thought that was good. It was a nice job with that.
So then it would be like up to the,
I'm sorry. Up to the church to kind of decide which way they were headed after that decision.
So the one church plan would pass. And we'll see what nuances come from that. But what eventually would come down to me, so for your congregation, would be, do you allow marriages or not in the building? The pastor would have to choose whether or not to perform marriages. And are you willing to accept a gay appointment?
And those don't have to be unified. So it could be, we won't allow a gay person to be our pastor. We won't allow things that, but we will allow marriages. They don't have to be like a line. And it's possible to say something like, we don't want same-gendered marriages in our building, but I'd be fine do it somewhere, as long as I wasn't doing it in our sanctuary. That you know, that kind of sense. Yeah, hang on, Jen. Ow, wait. No, wait.
How long is it gonna take for us to learn? Is it gonna be right after the conference in 2 weeks, or is it gonna be a lengthy time?
Yes, we should know when the conference is over, what decisions they've made. How long it takes to implement that will depend on what they choose.
Yeah.
So again, the connectional conference plan could take some years to implement, the others maybe some months.
So it's written into the plan. The boondoggle one. This is one of the reasons it requires so many constitutional changes that the odds of that passing is one of the reasons. I mean, we're not being negative against the plan. So when we use that term, it's just we were really struggling to envision there being enough unity around it to have that pass. That plan has a 4-year plan as part. By the way, the chart that you have there is a 98-page report that gives full detail on all these plans, which I have in my office, and I'm happy to share with you, make you a copy of it. I'm not being funny when like if you want, like I've read all 98 pages, I'm assuming David's read a lot of it or all of it as well. So just know there's more than just this chart to it, you know, but it goes through why the commission came up with it, who on the commission was for it, who was against it. So the other thing is to know that the commission itself proposed it, but there was no one plan that everybody on the commission was like, this is what we think should happen. They were also divided. The majority were for the one church plan. You know, so if the one church plan happens, then that timeline, because it's not mandated that the local churches make a statement one way or the other. The odds are we need to, but it's not mandated, so we get to kind of our own time frame around that. So we can say we're going to take a year and do Bible studies and prayer and conversation. You know, we kind of pick our own thing around that. The traditional plan will probably go into effect as of January. I think it's listed in the report that it would be effective January 1st of 2020. I think it's the recommendation. Now again, they can change. We can only tell you what it is for where we know what they're suggesting. Good questions. Other questions?
A couple weeks from now.
So yeah, it is the 23rd. When is the general conference?
Starts the 23rd of this month.
I just want to, sorry, I'll give you 1 second. Just for full disclosure, I'm on vacation that next week. It has nothing to do with this, all right? No, I swear to you, I picked it months ago. It was the only week that I could go on vacation. So just when people are like, well, convenient she's on vacation, that's not true. But I want you to know I will be, but I'll be back for that next Sunday.
Would you remind me how a bishop is decided and what determines the bishop's decision? Which plan he would go with? I mean, it's an individual or?
Sure. So, just we said, general conference meets every 4 years, so does jurisdictional conference. And the jurisdiction is an area, so we're in the northeast jurisdiction. And you need X amount of bishops for each jurisdiction. So when a vacancy occurs by death or retirement, then that has to be filled at jurisdictional conference. And nominations go in from annual conferences, and the jurisdictional conference elects the bishop, and then appoints that bishop to an annual conference, to an area. And it's determined, you're asking, and then how do they decide which plan they're going to do? I mean, that's a personal choice that they have.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question though, and it's males and females, just so you know, not all bishops are men. They can't, depends on the plan, but on the plans where there's choices to be made, let's just say that. They don't get to dictate to the annual conference. The annual conference would vote. So just like I can't dictate to this congregation, this is what you'll do around here. Like I'm not going to stand up on Sunday and say, this is what's going to happen in our building. Like, I don't get to dictate that. I can be a part of the conversation. You can take seriously my spiritual opinion, but we don't get to dictate that to each other. Same thing. So an annual conference can decide for themselves, this is going to be our policy around ordination. And if a bishop doesn't want to do that, is an agreement, then technically they could say, like, basically they said, then there'll be another bishop that comes in to do the ordination, right? That was.
Right, well,
If one of those
if the
plans.
conference says we're not going to ordain anyone who's gay, then that person would go to a different conference. Or they bring a bishop in the other way around, so there's going to be some moving. The goal is to have context, and also conscience, so that people can act with their own conscience on where they are for this. For clergy, our Board of Ordained Ministry is the group that examines clergy candidates and recommends for ordination. What we call the executive session. It's all of the clergy in the conference are the ones who vote on that. So the Board of Ordained Ministry can say, we're nominating this person, and the executive session can say, no, we're not doing that. And that's where that decision would get made. So there are different levels of where that happens. Did I confuse you more than I cleared it up? You're looking
I'm
at
just confusing myself, which is easy to do. The overall decision of which plan they go with.
It'll depend on the plan. In the traditional plan, there is no choice. It doesn't happen.
You can stay and go this way, or you can leave the denomination. That will be the only choice in the traditional plan.
But it's a vote on.
The General Conference is happening in 2 weeks. Well, there's those 3 plans, that's what the commission has suggested, but there are like now 87 other petitions where they can change the plan, modify it. That's what they're coming together for those 3 or 4 days to do. So
At the end of that, there will be a decision on one of these 3.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
There will be a decision.
There will be a decision,
The
which could
decision
be
could
no
be,
decision.
the decision could be no decision,
Right.
or it could be something different
Right,
than what you're
87.
seeing there.
Changes.
Right, but because these 3 plans have been proposed, and that's so the same delegates going to this general conference are the ones who were at the 2016, did not elect new people to go. That was one of the points, so it could be a continued conversation. So one of the hopes is that, and this is a hope, is that since the same people asked for guidance from the Council of Bishops, they'll take that guidance into account. So there's a lot of hope that the majority will be, discussion will be around these 3 plans, but there's going to be some sort of tweaking to they'll never pass just as there's just no, I don't know, I have no hope of that. Without somebody wanting to change something. And so basically what will happen is when General Conference finishes and we have a sense, I'll both send out in an email or a letter and also discuss, just announce from this is what the decision was, and from there, then I can explain decisions that need to be made or not made and things like that. But I didn't want to wait to do that and then throw all this at you guys be like.
This way we know what could happen, but it's not written in stone.
Yeah.
This is what's on the floor right now,
Right.
and
Not a petition.
understanding that things can shift.
I guess I'm trying to understand this one church plan.
Okay.
Is this us sitting here as a body at a church council meeting and bringing this up and then having a vote and saying United Methodist Church here in Mayo does not want to have an LGBT pastor, or we don't want to have same-sex marriages, and then the conference allows us to be that way? Or is the whole conference going to go, we're taking this plan and the whole conference is going to accept LGBT ministers, same-sex marriages?
If the general conference approves the one church plan, so that's what comes out of that, then the local church will make some decisions, which you're going to do locally.
Right, so there are some, I think it was your question. There's some decisions that belong to the local church.
That's what I see in the slide,
Right, so the decisions that we would make, let's say we had a council meeting that we can decide to make decisions any way we want, like we could have a whole church meeting where, but say we decided we're gonna make the vote in ad council. Ad council gets to vote on whether or not, if the one church plan passes, whether or not you would accept a homosexual clergy, and whether or not you will allow same-gendered marriages in the building.
Right. Because that's what gets to me when I see it on the board at the Alton Conference. is you're gonna have every church, which I guess we got about 100 churches in the conference. You're gonna start putting pins up on the board, which ones accept and which ones don't
Yes.
accept. And then you're gonna have to put the pastors to where they are.
But where he was talking about de facto and what was the other fancy word? De jure. The reality is there are already a lot of those pins for a lot of different reasons on those churches.
Figure that.
So it's-
And then my one question is, we make the statement that we don't want a pastor like that. And whether it's judgmental or you're gonna attack people, then we get one with a conscience that says they don't want to do same-sex marriage, and you put that pastor here with us and everything's great. If somebody comes in and wants to be married in this church as a same-sex couple, and then since it's the law of the land that that is legal,
No,
we unite
No.
become
no. So
beautiful.
so this congregation gets to decide what happens in your sanctuary. What you can't do is mandate the clergy. So say this congregation is for. They say, yes, we're fine to have same-gendered marriages, and say, I'm your clergy, and that goes against my understanding of the gospel. But David, being the retired pastor he is, says, I'm okay with that. That if a same-gendered couple wants to be married in our building, I call David, because I won't do it, because I'm not saying that's my belief, I'm saying that's the scenario. I would be saying, that's not something I can do, but David is willing to do that, and this church is fine for that to happen, and so there you go.
I was worried about the jeopardy
Or vice versa.
Right.
So the church says, we don't want that, and your pastor says, I'm willing to do it, that pastor would have to do it elsewhere.
That's what I want to
Right, so you also can't say to me, you can't do it ever.
It's all
You know.
identified,
Right. So
So let me just clear that. So the one church plan is allowing for that flexibility, for that context. The traditional plan, you don't make the choice, it's made. It's not happening. You're not going to have it here, and if your pastor does it here, that pastor's going to be charged.
That's clear.
And I'm not speaking for or against, I'm just,
No, exactly.
that's the deal. That's really the difference between them. One church gives context and flexibility, and the other does not. And will there be some major map? There's some confusion with that, certainly, and how that goes.
Yeah, and then, living into the future is a challenging thing. So we're not, but so we just want to try to make sure that at least what's up for conversation and how it might play out makes enough sense. Yeah, Lisa.
More unknowns, but more unknowns.
It's fine, we'll take out our crystal ball, it's fine.
Yeah, right, but, so basically it's the first column one church and the second column traditional.
Correct.
And whatever they
Yes.
meeting, everyone gets pulled up to the top, your representative, whatever they decide, that's how it goes. After the 26th, is the decision
Yes.
made
Yes.
at the end of
Correct.
those 4 days?
Yeah, the decision or a no decision, yes.
Or notice.
The outcome
Yeah.
The outcome of general conference will be on February 26th, and it's going to be live streamed, a lot of it. I would be very surprised if we didn't make some level of national news. I mean, I can't even imagine that wouldn't happen. So it's probably not going to be hard for you to hear the results. What I don't want you to get caught up in is the anxiety and craziness of, is this result? That's one of the reasons we're having this. This is because what's happening everywhere doesn't have to be.
Right here.
Right. This is Mayo, you know who you are. We're not making, so, and whatever path Mayo needs to take, Mayo will get to take it. Whether it's leaving, whether it's staying and making some changes, whether it's staying and making no changes. Whatever that authentic path is for Mayo, we'll find a way to take that path. And we'll do it in as much of a time frame that we can control as possible. Whatever we're given to control is what we'll control. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this, But so the results will be out right away. If you'll just hold back until I can come back from vacation, I won't even miss a Sunday. Then we can have then we'll have a greater reality to talk about which decisions are coming our way, and then we can start to talk about how we want to try to do that. And that's not something I'm not handing that down either. So there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of conversation happening.
No silly question.
If you say the church leaves and starts its church, who's the minister?
Right, okay. Yeah, so that's not a silly question, that's just a complex question. So Janet's asking, so what if Mayo says our authentic path? So I say the traditionalist plan, because that's really be the one where you'd probably be most likely to say. Say the traditional plan pass, and Mayo as a congregation says that just isn't who we can be and how we want to live into the future, we're going to want to leave. That there would be a whole process around
Separation, future.
yeah, the complexity of that would be significant and would not likely happen quickly.
So would it come to two churches at that point?
We would be a separate church if we wanted.
If Mayo decides to leave the United Methodist Church, then they might be Mayo Community Church.
Okay.
They might not be the only one either. There could be multiple.
That's right.
And just like AME, I mean, we can use that as an example.
we can't.
Would you like an example of one church plan?
Yes.
We have a biblical example.
Okay.
Okay. The church in Antioch, with Paul and Barnabas, was involving Gentiles. They were worshiping, they were part of church leadership. The church in Jerusalem said, our scripture is pretty clear that this is a Jewish-only event. And Gentiles we're not supposed to associate with, we're not supposed to hang out with, we're not supposed to be friends with, we don't go into their homes.
Right.
That can't happen. So they sent representatives to Antioch and said, this can't happen, we've got to give this up. Paul and Barnabas have said, we don't think so. And so they hustled down to Jerusalem, and they brought all the different leaders in the church to Jerusalem for what's known as the Jerusalem Conference. Think of it as a special general conference. They all meet in Jerusalem, and they debate. And they go back and forth, and there were some Pharisees who are part of the Christian movement. They're quoting the law. And you got Paul and Barnabas who are saying, forget that, Jesus has brought a whole new understanding, and we're going this direction. And Peter gives his testimony because he had that experience with Cornelius, and so he was like, ooh, well, maybe this is okay. And he's giving that. And they're trying to decide. So the question is, can Gentiles be part of the church? Fully incorporated, right? That's the question. So James, who's head of the Jerusalem church, finally stands up and he says, well, we've had some pretty good testimony here that maybe that's a good idea. But we need to have some restrictions. And so they came up, you can't eat meat given to idols, and I forget, there were 2 or 3. Otherwise, it'll be okay. And so the Antioch church says that works for us. Jerusalem church said that works for us. But the Jerusalem church never let Gentiles in. The Antioch church did. Peter wanted to be clergy just for the Jewish church. Paul wanted to be clergy for the Gentile church. And so each in their context, they went in. And they worked in that way. That really is kind of a one church plan where they're working in context for that. As they work through it. And we've been down this road painfully, a number of times. I'll give you the AME example. They split again, by the way, because there were some within that church that weren't happy. And so you also have the AME Zion Church. And I see you have an ME sign over your door coming in. That could have said MP. It said MP. You know what that is? When the church formed in this country, it was formed as a Methodist Episcopal Church, which is evidently the history of Mayo, okay? Episcopal simply means you have bishops, that's part of your polity, okay? The Methodist Episcopal Church. Well, some very active, very faithful laypersons said, when we read Scripture, we're not saying hierarchy, and we just don't think we ought to have bishops. And so they split and became the Methodist Protestant Church. Okay? To say, we're not going to have bishops as part of that. And formed that. And then we had the whole issue with slavery, and the church said, we don't think we're going to let our bishops hold slaves. And so the Southern churches said, that's a slippery slope. Pretty soon they're going to say, nobody can have slaves, so we're getting out while the getting out's good. They split. Now you have the ME Church South. all of those churches came back together in 1938, Methodist Protestant, Methodist Episcopal South, and Methodist Church, and formed the Methodist Church. And then merged with the Evangelical United Brethren, which was a merger of the Evangelical Association and the Brethren Church, and became the United Methodist Church. All of those denominations were separate because of race, or polity, or language. You know why we didn't merge with the Brethren Church early? The Methodist Church? They spoke German. Guess who was at Francis Asbury ordination as bishop, consecration as bishop? Philip Otterbein,
Oh,
was now Old Otterbein Church, named after him. Because the theology was almost identical, but it was a German-speaking church. And so they developed side by side. So race, ethnicity, polity, language, all of these things have at times separated us, and at times overcome. We're never free from this. If we get this resolved, there will be something else. Please, Lord, not in my lifetime. And I say that, but I'm being funny in a little way, but I'm not joking, seriously. There will be something else. By the way, the Church of the Nazarene came out of this movement. And the Assembly of God, not exactly, but in some ways came out of this movement, the Methodist movement. There are lots of splits, mergers that go on as we try to decide who can be, who can't, who has what power, who doesn't have what power, who speaks what, who looks this way. It's always swirling within the life of the church. It's not our most glorious history, but it is our history, and it's our reality. It's a social reality.
And if you're enjoying it, I'm offering a series of lectures on Sunday evenings during Lent called the 101 series, and one of them will be United Methodist History 101, which I'll do a lot of this in greater detail. So if you're enjoying this little tree branching journey, I also do Christian history, which takes us all the way back to Peter and Paul.
I did a unit, the church had just retired from, we did the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, so we did a whole thing on the Reformation, which I already knew a lot about, but I got a lot more into even in preparing for that. And it was mind-boggling, the debates and the splits and how many denominations spun out almost immediately. Two of the major reformers, Luther being one, my wife's saying shut up. I will shut up.
I told you we were both geeks.
41 years she's been telling me that, I still don't hear it. One last word. Zwingli and Luther, two of the major reformers, were identical in theology. Identical, except in interpreting the Lord's Supper. They had one little doctrinal difference on that. And Luther said that we can't be friends. And they went two different ways, two different denominations. It's our history, folks, and it's painful, but it is. And we just hope that God leads us through it. And wherever we come out, God's church will go on, with or without us. That's what I said. God's not committed to Methodist.
What?
God is committed to the gospel. And God's church will go on. And we can be part of that, or not. But God's church will go on. That's what I hold on to. And I've been a lifelong Methodist. My dad was a pastor. We have 82 years between us of serving this conference. So we have a deep love for it. But I have a deeper love for the kingdom. And that is not in jeopardy here. Okay? We'll see where we are as part of that. But that's not in jeopardy. I will now...
No, well said. No. Thank David for being here with us today. And depending on the conversations we need to have in the future, I will likely invite David back. And again, I've been very clear with the leadership about this. I have strong passions and strong ideas. I'm sure you're shocked, just shocked to hear that. And I don't want my strong opinions to interfere in my ability to be a pastor here, because it may be that my opinions are different than Mayo's, and we'll just need to walk through that. But so that's one of the reasons I want you to go ahead and get to know David a little bit, and he'll come back. Just very briefly, on the back of your first page in that handout that's not slides, in case you would like to do some more, all right, or hear some other opinions. You've heard David and I today, we are 2 opinions. There are plenty out there. I'm going to encourage you not to get bogged down in it, but if you want more, I've given you 4 websites. One is our own conference discussion of the Way Forward Commission. It has opinions by our own bishop and other folks like that. Number 2 is on the denominational website and discusses general conference. There's some links where you can see panel discussions, and it'll be on that website that you'll be able to watch parts or all of the general conference 2 weeks from now. If you want to actually watch the conversations as they unfold, I guarantee you it's interesting, but maybe not as interesting as you think. Then the denomination also has a page on the Way Forward, all right, so I gave you that. And then there's a website that's not denominationally approved necessarily called the United Methodist Insight, but it's a forum website, so there's a conversation, and lots of different opinions on there. So if you're wanting to hear more opinions, for whatever they're worth, they're out there. Then I also gave you 4 books, they're sitting in the back, that I wanted to recommend. The Anatomy of Peace is one that all the clergy were asked, particularly, and lay people at our annual conference has to read. It has a lot to do with how can we disagree without being destructive. And that's something that's very important to me, that we all get the right to have our opinions without demonizing and tearing each other down, so I recommend that. And then, again, if you're looking for some opinions, Holy Contradictions, I felt is really well done. It's a collection of essays that various people, some on the commission, but all very well sort of known in their areas, wrote around this, whether some of them writing more about sexuality, some of them writing more about how we might need to split, or why should we try to be unified. None of the essays are terribly long, they're written very well, and they cover a wide range of perspectives. So as I've read them, there's things I've never thought of on the whole spectrum, and some I'm like, I couldn't disagree with you more, and some I'm like, yes, so it's all in there. So anyway, then there's 2 other books that I've read that I found helpful, so I put that out there. Anybody, you're welcome to talk with me personally. If you're interested in my opinion, I'm happy to discuss it with you. I just won't be doing it in large group settings. That way we can have personal conversation and so forth. All right, so we've got a prayer to send us forth, and then we'll get y'all out of here. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of the conversation. This is for Unison, so let's all read it together. God of us all, guide us in your wisdom so that we might find your way forward. Grant us compassion, patience, gentleness, and self-control. Empower us to see all of your creations and find ways to love them as you love them. May your Holy Spirit be our ever-present guide and companion as we seek to be your disciples in the world and to follow the way of Christ. Amen. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time.